been quite honored to be sharing this segment. And just to, kick in high gear, we're having Victor Haze as the International Ecosystem Director of Health Valley, the Netherlands. I will say that he is probably one of the super clusters group that we have here in the strategy tools community. We have been learning quite a lot from Victor. He is also co-author of Cluster Business Model Report, which hopefully we'll have in Spanish in a couple of weeks. And Victor, having said that, please take the stage.
Okay, thank you, Roberto. Before I get too much credit for a lot of stuff, I'll share my screen. Hopefully everybody can see the nice opening slide. I'll be talking a little bit about exploring cluster business models. I hope Adelina and or Roberto will give a sign in time when the minutes are running out. But let's quickly start. Like Roberto said, I co-wrote, well, 3/4, Christian wrote, of course, and I added some stuff on cluster business models. The report was out. We started thinking, oh, just let's write a report. It's going to be 30 to 40 pages, and then we added use cases, etc., and it grew into this monster of more than 200, and it was downloaded in 77 countries. And now Chris has the idea to make it into a book, and you all know Chris, so that book is probably coming at the end of the summer. We'll see how that works. But on cluster business models, why we need to talk about it, why it's so difficult to find these right business models. And I would love to tell you something about what I've been doing the last couple of months, actually. And I'm very much looking forward also to your responses and your input on some of the stuff at the end of the presentation. This is a familiar picture. Some might have seen it before, but really quickly, when I started 6 years ago as innovation manager for Health Valley, I really didn't have much of an experience being a cluster manager. I think hardly any representative that is a cluster manager now has a clue of what that specifically was. I think there's no formal training in being a cluster manager, and to me it's like a combination of account management, of project management, of change management, and putting that all together at some point will help you build this cluster and build these partnerships, etc. So when I started, I found myself in a kind of a unknown situation, and I started drawing stuff out to basically find what this system was where I was in. And I've used this picture a number of times to also explain to other people what to me the cluster was, or later what the ecosystem became. And every once in a while I'll go back to this picture and see if it's still the same or not. But yeah, it sometimes helps to draw out these stuff. I think Holger will agree with me on that. But over these last couple of months, we've been working within Health Valley also to look at our own cluster business model, because we're merging with another network just a little up north in the Netherlands. And basically for me, that was really a sign also to start implementing all these canvases and all this stuff that I've been learning in strategy tools. When I started with the global coaching in November 2019, that was just a continuation of visual thinking that I started earlier with service design thinking and design thinking. I really like the way that you can use these canvases for people in different places or from different systems in order to get a complex message across in a simple way, maybe. So I really pushed also to start using these canvases in my own situation, with various forms of success. I can tell you, but I'll touch upon that maybe a little bit later. This was really one of the eye openers of recent times when this cluster value triangle, when we were writing the report, it actually first said the cluster triangle, and then I later said to Chris, maybe we should call it cluster value triangle, because all of a sudden I was thinking, okay, this triangle really helps us build value in the cluster itself. And I find it a really powerful image on again on explaining where you can take this cluster and where you can add value to it, because ambition and the strategy and the business model, financing and the structure and governance, all are, to me, wheels that you can turn to really change the business model of the cluster itself. And it's really, I thought it was really tricky to also to try and explain this to other colleagues. For sure, we used the ambition canvas and in finding out the strategy for Health Valley ourselves, and just a simple what sounds like a simple exercise to give a voice to what really the ambition is of the cluster, or what your focus area is, that turned out to be really difficult within the team to find the right framework, more or less, to what we were doing, let alone the structure and the governance on how the board is built up, etc., etc. For us, for instance, our network, the board is basically built up of people being asked to be on the board, and when we talk within strategy tools on clusters, and we talk to other cluster managers, and we talk to other areas, I find there's a lot of difference in sometimes how that governance and how that structure is perceived and how it's filled up. And I think if I compare it, for instance, to Health Valley itself, I would focus much more on the area, on the focal point of the cluster itself, and build the structure around there. So really also use that canvas on structure and governance to fill out the different roles that you need in the board. That was just one of the of many things that came to mind as I was working much more with these canvases over the last couple of months. And here are some of these canvases, and I think really for me it helped just by focusing on these 5 or 6 canvases to also start working on the strategy for our own cluster, and the business model, and the supercluster structure in the lower left corner. That's very interesting. On top left, the ambition canvas. Making a quick step to what I'm doing now is I'm also using within a project for a European foundation working on a specific healthcare issue. They wrote a tender for a support action on ecosystem development and building a framework. And this tender went out maybe 6 or 7 months ago. And then I thought, okay, let's write a design brief on that specific question. Oh.
Never mind, that was Chris.
Oh,
muted.
Okay. I wrote a tender specifically for that project, and I thought, okay, let's write in as many strategy tool canvases that I can. I really didn't figure that the tender would fall my way, but it did, and I designed it a little bit with this maybe known or not so known. This is the double diamond from the UK Design Council, a very often used model in design thinking on how to work on a problem and get from a problem to a solution. You can find this anywhere, but probably we'll also share the slides so you can have a look at it. But this, I use this to develop the project for this foundation. And what you see now is basically the next question that I'm trying to answer for this project, and it has to do with the fact that they said, okay, we get the stepping stone approach, we get the ecosystem thought, etc., but we're looking for a kind of a practical guideline in how to develop our own ecosystem. The project was based on working with specific European regions working in that field of the European Foundation, and they have been working on a project level base for the next for the last couple of years. So the foundation would give incentives on projects, and the pan-European regions would tender for these projects. They will get sums of money, and they would execute the project, etc., etc. Now they were in an area that they said, okay, forget about the projects. How can we work on pan-European level as different regions? And is that then the ecosystem, or how do we call it? What is an ecosystem, etc., etc. So I found myself moving from the cluster idea and the supercluster idea. I don't use that term anymore. More into ecosystems. I use the supercluster term not so much because it's politically sensitive. Sometimes people think in the whole cluster that they're doing something new to what is already there. So if you move a little bit to ecosystem and just use the supercluster canvases and theory, you'll find it much easier, because everybody thinks they know what an ecosystem is until you ask them, give me your definition of ecosystem. Then you find that it's not so obvious for everybody. So there's a lot of different variation in the definition. But long story short, this is basically now my new idea of presenting it to the project as a kind of an ecosystem guideline in how these different regions could work with the supercluster material and the ecosystem material of strategy tools, but not calling it strategy tools or supercluster. So this is already second iteration, more or less, because I talked to Javier and I talked to Roberto and say, okay, guys, give me your first feedback on this model, more or less. So you recognize the discovery phase and the define development and delivery. And basically the general thought about it is, if I were to start with building or extending on the ecosystem, I would say first we have to know who is in there. So have the different regions work on this notion of what an ecosystem could be, or what their own ecosystem could be. So I'm thinking, okay, just mapping out the landscape for themselves will help them give a visual on who's stakeholder and who's representative of their system, etc., etc. And obviously this ecosystem map, I have to zoom in every once in a while to get it more focused. And also this ecosystem map could help in building the system. I'm not sure how familiar all these canvases are to the people, and I'm also aware of the time, but maybe let's just stop there and ask you guys present, what would you think of such a guideline perspective on helping a different ecosystem? Do you also sometimes feel maybe a bit overwhelmed with the magnitude or the majority of the canvases, and you're trying to make your way in, okay, how can I best serve the customer or serve the question? To me, this was a first attempt in getting my own solution for the specific question of building out or mapping out an ecosystem. So I'm happy to hear some of your thoughts and remarks on that in general, or any other type question that you might have.
Holger, go ahead.
So yeah, thank you, Victor, for sharing it. It's super interesting and cool. So one thing that I'm missing here is phrasing in the beginning. Why are you actually doing it, right? So you're jumping right into the content of the cluster, but you're not speaking about like, why are we here, right? As a team, and I think you should search for ideas on how could you do that as well with the tool, to phrase that question and be very clear on this is our shared objective for this project and where do we want to land, because otherwise I feel it's a bit too content focused.
Yeah.
And people might get lost in the process. So you could have something that you could refer back to as well. And it doesn't have to be the ambition or the strategy. It's just about like, for this process, what is our objective?
So
what's the why?
Your suggestion would be to have something here in this empty space saying, okay, find something on the why, or find something on the purpose or the goal of why we are here. Is that what?
Yes. So yeah, for me it would be, for example, I'm often using a world map where we say, okay, we are here now. This is where we want to get, right? And the process that I propose is the way we get there. But that you have spoken about this. This is our shared objective. It's a shared goal that we strive for. Even if we deep dive into the define phase and it's all kind of messy and detailed, we still have that picture in mind and say like, this is what we want to achieve together. I think that's missing in this.
Yeah, quite right. I think I've also often tried to use this cluster of change roadmap, and because to me that is really a model that can help you literally map out the road that you want to go with. So, but sometimes I've experienced that getting that long-term vision from 2020 to 2030, that's also sometimes a rather difficult question. So but
and that's a question for the cluster, right? So I would say what you need is the question, where do we want to get with the process that we just run now? So the process that you suggest, it's not the dream goal of the cluster. It's just like, what do we want to have as an outcome after we have run through this process together?
Yeah, that's a good one. Maybe I stop sharing now so I can see everyone again. Okay. Other questions or remarks or feedback?
You muted, May.
You're mute, May.
Okay. Hello, everybody. I'm just sick. I'm in bed, but I'm still listening to everybody because I don't want to miss this.
What time is?
It is in our UAE now, 7 o'clock in the afternoon.
Okay. Not that bad.
Yeah, but I was in the hospital all morning and I thought I would never make it, but I did make it now and I just came in. So sorry I was late.
No problem. We hope you feel better soon.
Hopefully.
Victor, can you share with us a little bit the experience within Health Valley on the business model discussion when the report came out or when you started working on that? Was it also a kind of a new topic or a new discussion within Health Valley?
Yeah, partly. We are partly publicly funded and partly privately funded. We have some 220 partners. They have a partnership fee, and we have public funds coming in from the province. That system or that model changed already, I think 2.5 years ago, when we moved from a flat model fee into a package kind of deal based on the size of the company or the partnership. It's an often used model based on the size of the organization. You pay more or less for the partnership, but also in the package there's more to the package deal, etc. That was kind of a shock to the system because everyone, even the large corporates, were used to paying this flat model fee, which was just a couple of hundred euros. Needless to say, that was not nearly enough to fund the 30+ events per year, plus the yearly annual conference, two-day conference with everything on it. And when we moved the model, we thought, okay, how will this sit with the partners that now move from the flat fee into a 10-fold partnership fee, and will they stay? And the curious thing that happened was a lot of these larger corporations stayed and became much more active because now they had much more of a perceived value in funding the 4-star package. With, instead of 500 euro, they paid 5,000 euro, and now all of a sudden they were much more into, okay, but what does this package mean? What am I getting for these 5,000 euro, etc., etc. So it sparked much more engagement in the partnership model in itself, which was interesting to see, more or less. So the business model change was positive, and it's necessary if you change something in that model. You have to take your partners along your train of thought. So we also, before we started that new model, we had lots and lots of talks with the different partners on how this model could work, how it would look like, what the pricing would be, etc., etc. So it took some time in preparing and taking the partners along the journey of getting to this new model, because they all understood that public funding was going down, and they needed to chip in more on the private side. That was not the discussion, but it took some time to work with them. Okay, how can this look? What is still achievable, etc., etc. So yeah, it's a longer period of time that you need to talk to these partners.
And initially, the discussion had begun within the financing, level 1 financing of the cluster, or have you gone to even, level 3 and start discussing the cluster business model canvas as a really larger picture in terms of how to operate the cluster?
Yeah. Basically, we had discussions on 2 levels. We had the internal discussion on how to work with this cluster business model, and we had the external discussion. But that was much more just on the partnership model and the packages and the height of the partnership fee, etc., etc. It was not so much on. We didn't talk to the partners on the specific business model of the cluster itself. We might need to go there now, because now we're much more engaged in the discussion on the strategy and on the ambition. So I really worked a lot with the ambition, the supercluster strategy ambition canvas, because I think once you really put focus on what your ambition or your vision is as a cluster, then basically the focus areas and the KPIs follow from that, and that will help you literally bring focus in what you need to do for the cluster. And that then transcends to, okay, but now I have a visual of the partnership and of the whole ecosystem. And then you say, okay, but if this is the ambition and these are my focus areas and these are my KPIs, what am I then missing in that five pillar pentagram on entrepreneurship or on capital? And it makes it much more visual. Literally, it makes it much more visual on where you need to put your energy. The whole discussion now on future skill set, on talent development, it's much more now present in our strategic discussions, because now they find, okay, if we want entrepreneurship in our region, if we want to make sure that students will have the opportunity to build startups, and the startups need to have capital, and the capital needs to follow in on new research subjects, that will, that story, that narrative now is starting to land.
Very interesting. We have a couple minutes still before we hear from Juvica. Any more questions? Who wants to ask our guru on clusters?
I think we're running a bit late, actually, Roberto, because I thought I was just till 5 o'clock. So
yeah,
I'm from Luisa.
Yeah, since we did not get 100 people, we decided to just keep going. So you're still on the spot.
Okay. Well.
It's okay, Victor. I think you can take a break if you want to. I think it's just messing with you.
No, but then maybe what I find interesting now is where I see the discussion and the narrative for me, in my own ecosystem, in my cluster. What is coming together now is the image of the pentagram. And together with the strategic discussions within the team and the project on ecosystems, that kind of falls now in place together, because now I can test drive stuff in the ecosystem project, and then I can relate that back to the team and say, okay, this is working, this is not working, and by the way, if we want to serve better questions from the ecosystem or from other partners that we're engaging with, either within the Netherlands or on a European level, then we need to also bring that into our own strategic discussion. And by the way, let's have a look at the ecosystem map. What are we missing, and how can we build further on the other stakeholders within the system itself?